Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another week of an SDR's journal. And I normally start these off with acknowledging that if you are new here, the basic idea of this is that I speak about three key lessons that I've learned from the week before, and basically talk about it. So for this week, a couple of really interesting things that I wanted to speak about. Uh, the first one is and this one's an interesting one. This is so I think over the last week or so, I spent maybe about an hour. And what I did was I kind of tried to figure out like what are and I heard about this from Jed Marl. He posts a lot on LinkedIn, great, really good content. And I think I heard about it in a podcast that he was on, where basically it's about figuring out what are the triggers. For a company that is coming in inbound. So, what are the triggers for a company putting a demo request in inbound and trying to reverse engineer that when you're doing your outbounding? So as an example, one thing that I've seen that's been interesting, what I did was I went through, I guess, the last 10 to 15 demo requests that came in, and I noticed there's a specific pattern that about 60 to 70% of them was because someone new has joined the org, and they've either they themselves have come in inbound or they've told someone from their team to go in and basically look into tools, because normally when a exec comes into an organization they are looking to make changes for sure, and that's an interesting time to kind of get in. So I guess how do you reverse engineer for the outbound? You can kind of create lead lists on Sales Nav where you can specifically target people that are newer to their roles, as such that are your personas. So this was like a really interesting strategy that I've seen a bit of success with recently, where you're trying to reverse engineer what's working in inbound and use that in your outbounding as such. Number two, this was interesting. So I'd say um removing so the main idea behind this is but like main idea behind this, apologies, is removing friction points for tasks that you find challenging. Now hear me out. One task that when I started off in this role that I did find a bit on the challenging side and complete transparency, which was cold calling. It did have that bit of a what you want to call, I guess, cold call anxiety as such. Now I'd say it's like 1,000 times better because you're in the role, you just keep dialing, you get better and better at it and managing it. But I guess for me, I kind of what I realized was that there were certain friction points that were stopping me from making cold calls, or that were stopping me from making as many cold calls as I wanted to make. One of them was normally I would do my cold calls right at the end of the day. I've had, let's say I've like worked from like 8 to 4, 4:30, and then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make my dials from 4:30 to 5:15. There were times when I'm like, I've basically like been working for the last whatever 8 hours or 9 hours, and I'm like pretty hungry. Might as well just like skip the calling, and I'll just cover up tomorrow. So a lot of times what happens is that when I've noticed that when I put it towards the end of the day, I'm not as like there's times when I'll do it, there's times when I don't do it. Second, so what I did was, as an example, was I shifted my call block towards the afternoon, where it's at 11:30 to 12:30, where I tend to do most of my calls nowadays, and like I've seen a major difference in my ability to stick to my calls and actually get my call volumes up. Another thing that I've noticed is that I mean, I live in a studio apartment. When I'm calling by myself in a studio, like I'd say I'm more of an extrovert, but like when I'm calling by myself in a studio, it just like I'm not as motivated. It doesn't feel as I guess, and maybe I'm just like I don't have the willpower that a lot of people do, but like I just don't feel as motivated to call by myself when I'm here. But what I have noticed is that when I'm calling with other people, whether that's in the office in person or whether that's on a Zoom call where there's like 4 or 5 of us SDRs together, I'm just way more like pumped to call. I'm actually like pumped to call. So like noticing like your energy patterns as such kind of made me realize that I got to schedule first to have more call blocks with other SDRs at my company. And secondly, I go to the office a lot more as well because I just find that I'm just more motivated to call in the office. I don't know what the psychology behind that is. And I'm guess I'm kind of I'm trying to not use it as a crutch as well, but at the same time, if it works, it works. And that's an example of, I guess, trying to remove friction points for tasks that you do find challenging. The last thing is, I think as SDRs, our job is to be a bit of a detective, and kind of figure out any angle to, I guess, quote unquote, crack the case as such or solve the case. So I do think there are different ways to get into the door rather than just the three channels that we all know of. So there's LinkedIn, there's this cold calling, this cold emailing, sure, but there are other ways to get into the door, and I think at times as SDRs we don't tend to leverage that. We don't tend to kind of look into that. So for example, recently there's an account that I was trying to go after for about a couple of months, was getting no traction with that persona that I was trying to get into. Someone from that company was going to a conference that some people from our team were going to be at. They met up, and that individual was like really impressed by our team, and she made the intro to the right person internally. So that's an example of like how like an in-person conference could also help you book that meeting. That there's not only these three channels as such. Um, this is just an example of the in-person conference, but the main idea behind this is that there are also other ways to kind of break through. But it's our job as SDRs to kind of figure out what else can I leverage. For example, is there someone in your C-suite that is potentially connected to someone in the company that you're prospecting into, and can you get an intro from them? That's another example of how like there are different ways to get into the door other than the three key sort of, I guess, channels that we always look into. So that's, I guess, this week's SDR journal, those three key learnings. Let me know your thoughts. I'm always curious to kind of figure out if any of these are working for you or if you've thought about any of these as such. And yeah, looking forward to come back on this next week. Cheers.